Good morning, my friends. This is Father Zirilli with our reflection today of Thursday of the fourth week of Lent. Our reflection today comes from our first reading from Mass today, taken from the book of Exodus, chapter 32. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once to your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, for they have become depraved. They have soon turned aside from the way I pointed out to them, making for themselves a molten calf and worshipping it, sacrificing to it, and crying out, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.' The Lord said to Moses, 'I see how stiff-necked this people is. Let me alone then, that my wrath may blaze up against them to consume them. Then I will make of you a great nation.' But Moses implored the Lord his God, saying, 'Why, O Lord, should your wrath blaze up against your own people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, with such great power and with so strong a hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent he brought them out, that he might kill them in the mountains and exterminate them from the face of the earth? Let your blazing wrath die down. Relent in punishing your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and how you swore to them by your own self, saying, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and all this land that I promised I will give to your descendants as their perpetual heritage.' So the Lord relented in the punishment he had threatened to inflict on his people." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, my friends, we hear today the well-remembered scene from the book of Exodus today, when the people essentially abandoned God. Now remember the background here that's going on here. We remember that God had brought his people Israel out of Egypt, out of bondage to slavery to Pharaoh, and through his mighty deeds, particularly those memorable 10 plagues that he visited upon Pharaoh, God sets his people free from slavery. He led them through the Red Sea to Mount Sinai, where they will receive God's commandments and laws, and through Moses, God's chosen representative, and from there God will lead them to the promised land. Now let me pause here and just reflect on this. Notice how that whole backstory there kind of prefigures, if you will, the life of grace that Christ gives us. We come to know Jesus Christ, who frees us from bondage and slavery. Not physical slavery, not to Pharaoh or anything, but the bondage and slavery of sin. That's worse than any physical bondage. Christ sets us free from that. We are led through the waters, not the waters of the Red Sea, but the waters of baptism, thereby becoming his people, his children, by adoption. We learn his commandments and holy laws, which do not bind us or restrict us, but truly set us free and reveal to us God's will and the way to eternal life in his kingdom. And that's the real promised land to which he leads us, not a physical place on earth, but the everlasting joy and life of heaven, a sharing in the very life of God. So we kind of see these events of Exodus really kind of mirror to us, reflect to us, and prefigure for us the gospel, the life of grace that Christ gives us. Well, back to our story. As we might remember, they arrived at Mount Sinai, and Moses went up the mountain to receive God's commandments, and he was up there for 40 days. Highly symbolic number, of course, in the Old Testament and for us today. And the people grew tired of waiting. And despite everything that they had seen, everything that God had done for them, the things that they had witnessed with their own eyes, right? They got bored, and they abandoned their faith. And they decided to make their own God, fashioning a golden calf and bowing down to worship it and claiming that this was the God that brought them out of Egypt and so on and so forth. It was the great sin of apostasy and idolatry. Well, I think about this strange Lenten season that we are in. I mean, during these 40 days, right, we are waiting, kind of like, in a sense, the Israelites were waiting. We are, during this time, we're fasting from the Mass, from the Eucharist. We are fasting, if you will, from our community, even from our friends, at least in a physical way. In a sense, we are waiting, just like the Israelites were waiting. But let's not make the same mistake that they made. I don't think anyone's going to go out and make a golden calf, but at the same time, we're waiting, we're praying, we're beseeching the Lord to come to our aid and help us. Don't give up on him. Don't abandon God. Don't abandon your faith. It's times like this, especially when it may seem that the Lord is far from us, that we especially need to remain faithful. We are still God's people. We are still on our journey to the promised land, right? We will still say our prayers. We will still practice our faith, keep the commandments, and wait and hope for the Lord. For we know by faith that he will not abandon us, so we will not abandon him. And in fact, if anything, we should use this time to seek to be even more faithful. And truly, that's what the season of Lent is about anyway. Well, that's our resolution today and our prayer. God bless you all.